In this video, I want to talk about how to leverage the power of friction to design your behaviors in a way that makes being disciplined more effortless. Therefore, I first want to define what I mean by friction, and then I want to go into how to leverage it to get rid of certain unwanted behaviors in your life and to encourage the good behaviors in your life. Now, being disciplined mostly is about two things. On the one hand, you want to avoid the things that are hurting you, like doom scrolling through your phone or eating a lot of junk food, for example. And on the other hand, you want to encourage and do more of the things that are good for you, like working out or studying, for example. Now, the problem is that the good things usually are more difficult to perform. They are uncomfortable in a way, boring maybe, they hurt, might hurt, like working out hurts at times, right? And the behaviors that hurt you most of the time are pretty easy to perform, like eating sweets, for example. It's a pretty easy thing. Scrolling through your phone is a pretty easy thing. Now, if you leverage the power of friction, you really want to make the things that are hurting you more difficult for you to perform so that it's less likely that you actually do it, and to make the things that are good for you easier to perform so there's less friction and it's more likely that you actually do it. So we're basically talking about the psychological or practical barriers that are holding you back from certain behaviors, and building some barriers or getting rid of them. So this is the whole point of the video. And I will go into a couple of examples how to use that to add friction in your life and remove friction to make certain behaviors more easy. Now, a short little example of this in real life that you've probably noticed before. A couple of years ago, Amazon added this buy in one click button to their app. So whenever you see something and you want to buy it really quickly, you just have to click on one button and you've bought it, and it will be there in a couple of days, right? That's an example of reducing the friction to perform a certain behavior. Amazon wants you to buy, so they make it easier to buy. You don't have to add the thing to the cart and then check out later on, which is like a couple of steps between you seeing something and buying it then later. And on the other hand, an example for adding friction would be when you are at a computer, for example, and you delete something. Most of the time, the computer will ask you if you really want to do it. That's an example of adding friction to make a certain behavior more difficult so that you don't delete something on accident, for example. Now, there are certain things in our lives, as I said before, you really want to encourage and certain you want to discourage. And discipline is all about doing that. But it's a very bad idea to do that by just using your willpower to avoid these things, because most of the time your willpower is very unreliable. It depends on your energy levels and your mood, and some days you will be able to withstand the urge to eat some sweets and others you won't. So utilizing the power of friction will help you with that without having to rely on your willpower, really. Now, I want to go into a couple of examples of how to do that. How to add friction to avoid unwanted behaviors. The example with eating sweets, for example. This is a common thing. A lot of people have sweets at home. They have it laying somewhere on the counter, and it's very easy to access them. Right? So it's very likely that you actually eat sweets, even though you don't really want it because you know that it's not good for you. But the temptation is there. So if you don't want to eat sweets, the best idea to avoid them is to add friction between you and the sweets. Meaning that, okay, you could hide them in a drawer, which will make it a little bit more difficult to eat them, but they are still there and you know where they are and you will find them if you want them. So the best idea here would be to avoid buying them at all, right? If you don't have sweets at home, you cannot eat sweets at home. That would be one example of adding friction between you and your unwanted behaviors. Another example would be social media, scrolling all day. This is something I really had problems with for a couple of years. And what I did was I deleted the apps from my phone. And in the end, I quit social media altogether, which made it extremely difficult to access it since I'm not on it anymore. I don't have any accounts and I don't use it anymore. And that's a good thing. Before that, I always would rely on my phone, reducing the screen time manually or making a blocking, how is it called? Making it, reducing the time I could use the app through the phone's function for that. But I always found ways to circumvent that. It's just a couple of clicks and you're back on it. And the best way I found to avoid social media altogether was by deleting it. That's another example of adding friction to make it more difficult, right? To avoid a certain behavior altogether. And the third example would be watching TV. I recently read this book called Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg. And the author talks about how he and his partner try to avoid watching TV all day. And they do that by hiding the TV in their basement. After every watching session, they unplug it, they put it in the basement, and every time they want to watch TV, they really have to think about, is it worth it to go down to the basement, bring the TV back up, plug it in? That's the power of adding friction. They still can watch TV if they really want it, like at a Saturday night and want to watch a film or something. But it's way harder to do it, and they don't do it like on accident. All of a sudden the TV is on. You know the problem, right? So that would be the third example to how to make certain behaviors more difficult to perform. On the other hand, there are certain behaviors you really want to encourage in your life. One would be working out, for example. Who doesn't want to work out more, right? And, many people have this gym membership, but the problem with going to the gym is that there's a lot of friction between you being at home and going to the gym, actually. Like for me, the next gym would be like 20 minutes of driving my car there. I would first have to pack my things, have to get my jacket on, my shoes on, get into the car. Half an hour later I would be there, and that's a lot of friction between me working out, being at home and me working out, right? So one example of reducing the friction here, which is what I really do, is working out from home. This is way easier just because there's not this time between me wanting to work out or setting the intention to work out and then actually working out. I can just do so immediately. Less friction there. It's way more likely that I do it, I've noticed. A second example would be studying. You see, this is a very, very basic example, but if you lay your book on your table and have it open, it's way more likely that you look into it than when you have it hidden in a drawer, for example. Very basic example, but you can think of other ways to make your behaviors easier for you. This is just to illustrate how simple it can really be. For example, I have a book at my night desk, and before that I had it hidden somewhere in a shelf. So every time I wanted to read, I had to go to the shelf, pull it out there and then read. And now I have it just beside my bed, and every time I go to bed at night, I see it there, I grab it, I read a couple of pages, and I read way more that way than before, even though like the friction of going to the shelf isn't that high, right? But this little change kind of made a big difference. So you really have to look at your life and think about how to make it more easy. Another example of this would be creating something. Like for these YouTube videos, for example, I'm making it a point to making it as simple as possible. I first began by building up this set. You know, I had 3 lights I had to put on. I put my camera on a stand, and I had to plug in my mic. And that was a lot of friction between me actually starting to record a video. So what I did was to simplify the whole process. Now I don't use any lights right now. I use the natural light. I don't even have a stand here. I have my camera put on some books, which you cannot see right now. And it's set up way faster that way. It's way easier to perform this behavior for me. And I don't have to tidy up everything afterwards, so it's way more simple to do it that way. Well, these are a couple of examples. You can think of more than these probably, but I really want you to get into this thinking, how can I make the things I want to do easier for myself, and how can I think the things I don't want to do harder for myself? Yeah, I think this was a really helpful thing. It really changed my life. It really helped me to be a more disciplined person, just because I now find it way easier to perform certain things. And it's funny because sometimes I see people struggling doing stuff, and I'm like, yeah, well, if only you removed these 3 steps from this routine, it probably would be way easier for you to do it, right? So enough talking, I guess, on the topic. I hope that this kind of helped. If so, I'd be glad if you subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you very soon. Bye bye.